It's very clear when offices are on vacation or closing for the holidays versus when business activities are super kicked up. So then we have to shift that content, right? Like, I don't want to lose eyeballs talking about ROI and,
Mm.
the bottom line and things like that when nobody's really thinking about it and people just want to have a good time and they're just scrolling to like, see what everybody else is up to. Then that's a really great place to put in more like fun, lighthearted B2C stuff that really speaks to like end users and stuff because it almost feels like, during the summer or during like winter holidays, like even decision makers don't necessarily have their like decision making like hats on, like they're also taking time off and just relaxing.
This is Social Pulse Podcast Hospitality Edition, your essential resource for mastering the unique challenges of social media marketing in the hospitality industry authentically. I'm your host, Mike Alton, and each episode we dive deep into the real issues, from evolving guest expectations to standout social campaigns, sharing insights and strategies you can put to work. Let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to Social Pulse Podcast Hospitality Edition, where we're digging into the challenges, successes, and the stories of social media community professionals in the industry just like you. Subscribe to gain valuable insights that you'll be able to apply to your own work and social presence from each and every episode. Now, when it comes to social media in the hospitality industry, most brands face a unique challenge. Your content needs to speak to both potential business partners and event planners who book large venues and contracts while also appealing to those individual guests who'll actually stay at your property or dine in your restaurant. It's like running two different marketing campaigns simultaneously. One focused on ROI and business value, the other on experiences and emotions. How do you strike that perfect balance without diluting your message or confusing your audience? If you're wrestling with this challenge in your hospitality marketing, you're not alone. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. Here to help us master this balancing act is Michelle Fan, an innovative social media strategist who's revolutionizing dual audience content at Felfel. Michelle has mastered the art of creating content that resonates with both corporate decision makers and individual consumers, leading successful campaigns for prestigious hospitality clients, including Major League Soccer venues and Equinox hotels. Her unique approach to multi-audience content has transformed how these organizations connect with their various stakeholders. And today, she's going to share her winning strategies with us. Hey, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi there. It's great to be here.
So excited to have you. Now, before we dive into some strategies, could you just share a bit about your journey and how you found yourself managing content for some of these multiple audiences we've been talking about?
Yeah, so most of my experience comes from working in nonprofit, actually. And that's a really interesting space to work from because you're asking the audience to take a lot of different actions like website visits, newsletter registrations, event RSVPs, petition signatures, and of course, donations, all without really being able to offer anything super tangible or like self serving in return. So like when you see an ad for coffee, it's super simple. If it sparks a craving, you go and buy that coffee. Or for a service rather than an item like an amazing hotel, a really nice location. And if you still have time off, you just go and book that hotel, right? But in the world of nonprofit, we're asking our audiences to do a lot of different things in exchange for usually the betterment of the community or the rest of the world. And even more, it's something that takes time to show results. So there were a lot of unique challenges there, but I learned a lot because we were navigating different audiences. So people who felt passionate about mass incarceration or environmental protection or women's rights. And of course, the bigger donors and board members as well. Especially when you work for a larger nonprofit, you have to be super mindful of juggling all those different interests while maintaining the same organizational voice and brand throughout. So that laid a really helpful foundation for me when I switched to a for profit startup where we're talking B2B for decision makers and B2C for all the other stakeholders and general brand awareness.
Got it. So, what would you say was kind of your biggest aha moment when you're making that transition from what we would call traditional B2C approach and figuring out that that just doesn't work for this kind of a dual audience strategy?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there was ever one exact moment where all just like clicked like a light bulb or solidified for me. I think it was a lot of like little learnings and a lot of disappointment, honestly, when you're like you think you're creating really high quality content and just seeing that it's not landing. So it was like, when I was trying to sell more on like emotion, like a more traditional B2C approach, it wasn't really moving the needle with decision makers. So at Fell, what we do is we serve this amazing chef crafted, like curated food, the kind of fancy stuff that actually tastes good, and like the opposite of what you'd be getting at the office cafeteria. And it's all super convenient because it's grab and go from our Fell fridge. So the idea and the need for something like that translates really easily to the average employee who's like, yeah, I'm sick of eating the same thing every day, or even skipping lunch because I can't leave my desk to go and wait in line. But photos of incredible food and a fancy smart fridge doesn't really say anything about like business goals and ROI for the actual people who sign on the dotted line with us. So I realized that for a dual audience strategy, I needed more of like a layered approach. And we started leading with more like data, like productivity metrics and cost savings, and then also pairing that with still that emotional appeal of like seeing happy teams have like chef crafted meals and things like that. And then those campaigns actually started clicking because they can address both of those audiences priorities without feeling like, something is missing from the equation.
Now, are you doing that kind of messaging in different posts, or you're layering it into the same post?
Yeah, this is something that took me a while to realize, and also especially when you have a lot of different people who are invested in what goes out on the social media. Like, I'm sure I'm speaking to a lot of social media managers here with the levels of approval and things like that, which I'm very grateful that I work at a startup where we're able to like be nimble, and pretty quick with things like this. But not every post has to do everything.
Okay.
Like, I think it's always great when you can strategically like layer stuff, and this is something that I try to do, where you kind of like blend that so that if someone's interacting with your online presence for the first time, they don't get like the completely wrong idea about what your company, your service or product actually is. But at the same time, I feel like it can sometimes become like this unnecessary pressure where it's like, hey, like your digital presence is like a curated collage of all of these different things that you're putting out online. So not every post has to do every single thing.
Got it, got it. So I think maybe um, an example might help illustrate what we're talking about for those of you listening. Michelle, could you walk us through maybe a specific campaign where you successfully engaged both business decision makers and end users, and what made that work?
Yeah, for sure. So it's always best when we have a really great client launch. And obviously that puts some pressure on the sales team to get us a really great client first. But it's amazing because then everybody's happy. It just checks all the boxes. Like, it's newsworthy, it shows the product in real life with real users, and it aligns us with really great logos that we're proud to support. So depending on how savvy you are with like content capture and the way you tailor that copy, you can get so much out of that. Like, you get product education, testimonials on top of, brand awareness. And it makes things easier on my end when we have a great launch that's planned and choreographed really well, because it's like a lot of this work is already done for me almost. I just have to be strategic about maximizing the storytelling there without boring our audiences. Um, but yeah, it's perfect because it shows the value of Fell, and feeding your teams and keeping everybody happy to decision makers. Like, you see an actual company that maybe your values align with, or you see the president or the CEO or someone who's leading that company like put into words why it's been valuable for them, while getting end users excited because they're seeing people like themselves engage with our services. So
Got it. So what are some pitfalls that maybe you've seen when brands are trying to do this juggling act that you're doing so well, talking to, different audiences at the same time on social media?
yeah, I feel like it's such a balancing act. So one common pitfall is being way too generic, to appeal to everyone, and then obviously that ends up resonating with no one. But then also being too specific can make it feel like I'm witnessing what should be a private text exchange or an email or something. And I also feel like sometimes like who you're targeting is also like what you're saying about the brand, even without explicitly saying it. So super exclusive luxury brands are clearly catering to a certain audience, and there's an element of that like unattainability and inaccessibility that actually works for them, but it can also turn people off, especially if it's done in the wrong way. So yeah, it's a balancing act. For example, at Fell, our B2B efforts are targeting decision makers like CEOs and heads of different departments, like I mentioned before. But we also believe in the democratization of food, right? And we've always been a people first company. So we don't want employees to see all of our content and feel like we're ignoring them. And we're just another culture initiative or office initiative or something that leadership puts in that the average employee doesn't really care about. And we want them to know that we're really there for them. So the key is, I guess, segmentation and purpose. So you have to really know which audience you're addressing with these posts and kind of tailor the tone and content so that you don't miss the mark. But again, like not every post has to do every single thing. So I think it's always good to have a mix of things in there and then always fall back on analytics and see what's actually performing.
Love that. And we're going to get to analytics in a moment, but you mentioned employees. Are you doing employee advocacy at all as part of that mix of posts?
Yeah, we're definitely trying to build out more of an employee advocacy program at Felfel. My colleagues are quite shy. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of me being behind the camera and like, encouraging and directing a little bit more, but employee advocacy is a huge thing. And I also think, especially on LinkedIn, and for B2B audiences, we're seeing so much more EGC and not just UGC of like, employee generated content. So it's an interesting growth.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of the same things. We have an actual advocacy tool baked into Agorapulse that brands are using to either encourage employees to post natively to LinkedIn,
Yeah.
or one of the really cool features is when brands can post to their company page and then
Mhm.
invite their employees to go to that post and engage with that brand post and really expand
Mm.
the brand presence. I mean, and just like quadruple, 10 times engagement and that sort of thing, which then has that wonderful ripple effect because the LinkedIn algorithm loves to
Yeah.
see that engagement and doesn't really care where it comes from. So we're
Yeah.
talking about LinkedIn here. How are you approaching, things like choosing which social network, which platform, and how you're distributing content differently when you're targeting both B2B and B2C audiences?
Yeah. So for B2B, we prioritize LinkedIn. That's where decision makers are sometimes scrolling, just to scroll, but more often, like actually
Mm.
looking for professional solutions and stuff. So we highlight more business updates, media mentions there. With our business, since it is like it is really a B2B business where we do end up having like end users and stuff, but we sell more B2B. LinkedIn definitely feels almost like our hub. I would say it's our most important platform. And then B2C, we use Instagram and Meta, not quite on TikTok yet. And I've been seeing that Twitter or X engagement rates aren't great, especially for like, I mean, engagement rates aren't great for links across all platforms except for Blue Sky, and I haven't decided how I feel about Blue Sky yet. But yeah, we're not on X for that reason. So, like I was saying before, B2C, we do more Instagram, Facebook. So, food content, pictures of specific people or of the team, that lives there, even though, I mean, team photos also do really well on LinkedIn. So in all honesty, in terms of content distribution, I feel like we're not really yet at a place where it makes a big difference which platform shows what. Though I do tailor the copy to make it more LinkedIn or Instagram friendly. But more than the platforms making a difference, I feel like it's more of a difference between paid versus organic social media. So with paid
Mm.
campaigns, I feel like you can be so much more direct, um, even kind of blunt sometimes with your
Yeah.
messaging since it's so targeted. So it's a great place to call out your audience directly, like, hey, are you a team member who's working past cafeteria hours, or are you an HR lead who's looking for new ways to motivate people to get back to the office? Because on LinkedIn, you can be pretty granular. And then when you think about content distribution based on platforms, it's also not always a super clean divide because everyone still has access to everything, even that if it's not their main platform. So the messaging still has to be super consistent.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's one of the challenges. It couldn't possibly be as easy as, "Hey, the B2B stuff goes to LinkedIn, the B2C
Yeah.
stuff goes to Instagram." No, we're not that lucky. Folks, we're talking with Michelle Fan about the challenges inherent in trying to talk to multiple audiences on social media, and in a moment, we're gonna get into that reporting and some other resources, but first, let me share how Agorapulse can help with reporting.
Actually can't say enough great things about the reporting with Agora Pulse. I feel like that is my job security every month. My clients aren't that active on social media, which is why they have me manage their profiles for them. And when they get that report, it verifies that they're making a good investment.
The metrics downloads are so simple and easy to read, and it really helps me show where we are doing things right on social and where we need to improve.
So I think one of the main reasons why we decided to move to Agora Pulse is because it's a more comprehensive, integrated tool for all of our marketing needs. So rather than what we have had to do historically with Sprout, which is use certain parts of that platform that work really well and then supplement it with other outside tools, by moving to Agora Pulse, we were able to keep all of that into one technology platform, which is not only a time saver, but it also makes sure that our analytics and all of our reporting's on point because we're pulling all from the same source.
It's a really great platform for agencies. It makes it really easy to manage, but gives me really, really, really robust information that actually helps me develop better strategies for my clients and better plans of action.
So, Michelle, I'd love if you could talk about the role that timing plays in your content strategy. Not so much like how many times per day do you post, but how often you're posting back and forth between each segment. I mean, like, do you alternate between B2B versus B2B focused content and trying to balance and check mark, hey, we published two of these, B2B focused pieces. So now we need to shift to the other side, or are you
Mhm.
trying to create content like that works for both simultaneously? How are you balancing it that from that perspective?
Yeah, I think I could balance it better. um, that's that's a really great question. I think honestly, it's I kind of look back at our editorial calendar like week to week and see what actually performed quite well, and what we were originally planning to post versus what ended up getting posted. I will say, even when I feel like I've been posting a lot of B2B content, I still naturally prioritize that. And I definitely have a bias toward B2B content currently because of the stage that our business is in, where we're really growing and trying to take over New York City. Um, but I think it's also really important to sprinkle some B2C content in there where it's just pure fun or human interest stories, or like photos of the team having fun, or photos of the team eating, or pictures of food, because at the end of the day, like, we want people to remember that our whole mission is good food at work, and that we're here for the employees. Um, so when I think about like how I want to kind of like split that balance, I feel like it's almost more determined by the calendar year, kind of. Like, it's very clear when offices are on vacation or closing for the holidays versus when business activities are super kicked up. So then we have to shift that content, right? Like, I don't want to lose eyeballs talking about ROI and,
Mm.
the bottom line and things like that when nobody's really thinking about it and people just want to have a good time and they're just scrolling to, like, see what everybody else is up to. Then that's a really great place to put in more like fun, lighthearted B2C stuff that really speaks to like end users and stuff, because it almost feels like, during the summer or during like winter holidays, like, even decision makers don't necessarily have their like decision making like hats on, like they're also taking time off and just relaxing. So that's when I like to sprinkle in more like B2C content. And we try to go a little bit heavier with B2B, when we know that, like, these conversations, it's the time of year where like budget conversations and plans about new offices and things like that are being had. I would say that's like an overall like guiding principle. But overall, I mean, generally speaking, I do try to always like sprinkle B2B in there.
That is such a subtle yet powerful mindset shift that I want to make sure everybody listening really understood, because like we're recording this in early December, we're going to release right around Christmas. So going into
Mhm.
that holiday period, if I'm understanding you correctly, that's what you should be talking about is the holidays and showing off people enjoying the holiday time and fun food and that sort of thing, and not trying to focus so much on ROI
Yeah.
when it's 4 days before Christmas. No one's thinking about ROI at that point. They're thinking about how
I
many more
hope
days do
not.
I have to be in the office before I'm
Exactly.
off for the rest of the year. And
Exactly.
what that illustrates for me is it's kind of like the same as the phrase work life balance, and people trying to say, "Oh, I want to get a work-life balance," when it's technically impossible to have work-life balance. If you're working 40 plus hours a week, there's no
Right.
such thing as work-life balance. But it's understanding what the proper ratio is. It's not 50-50, but what is it for you? And in this case, B2B versus B2C, it's not 50-50 for you. Maybe it's 75-25. Maybe it's
Mhm.
80-20, right? There's always that 20 to 25% that you're making sure by looking back at your metrics and your analytics and your post performance. Oh, we haven't quite hit enough B2C. We need to post some more. Is that, am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I like to take a look back and kind of see. So it is, I guess maybe it's a little bit more like retroactive than proactive, which is why I said I could probably do this a little bit better. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like you mentioned before, I hope nobody's thinking about ROI and the bottom line like 2 days before Christmas, or any other holiday that they're celebrating or taking time off for. So, it's important to know your audience, because if you put out the completely like opposite message and act like business as usual, you're gonna really like miss the mark. And it can just, not that I think some businesses like worry about like coming across tone deaf. I feel like it has to be a really egregious, like horrible post from a company to make me go like, I'm gonna unfollow you. But it does just show that you're not really like connected to who you're talking to. And I do think that that kind of leaves an impact with viewers and followers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you're looking back at past posts and you're
Mhm.
looking at their performance. What does that even mean to you? And how are you connecting the dots between, individual post performance or performance over the course of a week or a month to actual business impact, particularly when again, you've got two different, very different audiences that you're targeting with these posts.
Yeah, so I would say if we want to narrow down like the actual metrics that we're looking at, for B2B, it would be more lead generation, website visits, actual inquiries and stuff. We use HubSpot, so I think it can get very granular, which is really nice. It can get really like precise with, you know, where people are coming from and what module they actually interacted with on the website, what caught their attention, and stuff like that. So it's kind of nice there that I can be like, oh, I know that, this inquiry came from our LinkedIn presence or this specific campaign, and this led them to this blog post that we posted, which is really great. For B2C, I actually think it's a little bit harder for us to measure because there's almost kind of a gap between like, so we would look at, likes, engagement rates, sometimes like sentiment analysis, although I haven't done as much of that lately. But where we where we engage with the end user at Felfel is when they, actually buy something from the fridge, and we're not tracking, you purchased this culture pop and you're registered in the Felfil app as this user and you also liked this, you know what I mean? So there's a little
Yeah.
bit of a gap there that can make it harder to measure B2C actually. But yeah, the goal is to tie both of them to actual sales, utilization rate, and customer retention. So yeah, we use Google Analytics, HubSpot, native platform insights. It's actually one of the first times, I think this is the first role actually that I haven't used like a third party like scheduling slash measuring thing that puts all our social media and all of our platforms in one place. But anyway, yeah, there's a ton of data. Not always the data that I want, but there is a ton of data to sift through.
Well, maybe you should think about a third-party scheduling tool. Wink, wink. But no, I was going to say that everything you're saying, particularly about the B2C realm, actually echoes a lot of the sentiment that I hear on our sister podcast,
Mm.
Retail Edition, where that's essentially a retail environment. You're selling direct to consumers, and it's really hard to know what, if anything, you might be doing on social that's moving the needle. I had a great conversation with the social media manager for Five Below, and she's creating fantastic TikTok content. She was going, her offices were above a Five Below store. So she'd go down into the store and put on clothes or grab accessories and create a skit and post it. And, maybe it gets a lot of engagement, maybe it doesn't, but does it actually drive purchases? Nah, who knows? But definitely from the B2B side, it's definitely easier to track that. What are some tools or resources that you found that you'd say are most helpful in managing and creating content for this kind of a diverse set of two different audiences?
Yeah, actually, just a note on the last thing you shared. I feel like this comes up a lot whenever I see like LinkedIn posts about this was such a successful marketing campaign. Like, look how amazing the Super Bowl ad was, or like look how many views and eyeballs like this brand got on like this new product launch or something like that. And the question is always like, okay, but how many users did that actually translate to? Like, how many sales did that actually translate to? Because I feel like we're so chronically online nowadays that like there's a very tangible difference between like your activities like digitally versus your actual like consumer habits in person. So yeah, I would be really interested to see how other people kind of tackle that problem. But anyway, to get to your question, in terms of tools or resources, I use Canva a lot for super quick content creation. The Adobe suite for creatives, so like Photoshop, InDesign, Premiere Pro for video editing, and a bit of Figma sometimes for like drafting things up or like other like concepts when we're not using Canva. Then I use Asana for our editorial calendar. So like I said before, it is the first time that I haven't used a third-party scheduler like Hootsuite or Agorapulse. And it took some time to get used to, but I actually, where I am now, I'm at a place where I actually prefer it. Since we're only actively posting on like LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, it's very manageable. And then I look at the data on those platforms natively. And then we also use Google Analytics, Looker, and ads for keyword research and like website traffic and stuff like that to just see how things are like translating to actual like sales activities and like conversions and stuff.
No, that actually completely makes sense. I know if we're not managing a lot of social profiles, it's often best to just be hands in on the native platforms. It's going to give you the nuance better of how that platform is going to respond to certain kinds of posts. It gets you that much closer, so to speak, to
Mm-hmm.
the audience, and it's quite manageable if it's only a few profiles. I'm
Trust me,
feeling that pain right now.
I complained
Yeah.
to my boss early on. I was like, you can't have me doing this. She had me doing this, and it's been completely fine.
Yeah, well, wait till Threads and Blue Sky really start to take off,
Oh
and
my goodness. Yeah.
you
When we
know,
add more platforms, for sure, I will be raising this topic of conversation again. And I've definitely been looking. I mean, there's been so much talk about Blue Sky lately, and I'm
Yeah.
always like holding my breath whenever someone's like, "Oh, this is the new big thing," and I feel like there was such a vacuum when Twitter rebranded to X, that I think I want to give it a little bit more time to see how things shake out. But yeah, who knows? Maybe Agorapulse will have another customer very soon.
Well, one of the interesting things about me personally is I've been blogging about social networks since 2008, 2010. I've been writing about the evolution of certain networks. I've written about networks you've never even heard of, in likelihood. But I feel that gives me a really good sense now of
Hmm.
whether or not certain platforms are going to take off or not. Like I've never been bullish on Mastodon and many other networks that were within the recent years, but Threads, I could tell early on that was gonna take off, and the same thing now with Blue Sky. It's
Hmm.
going through a moment where it's pushed into the mainstream.
Yeah.
There are sufficient people moving to the platform where now if you join the platform, it's not crickets. There's plenty of other people for you to connect with and talk to. So, just word of the wise for all the brands listening, the social media managers listening, yes, you should be actively looking at whether or not Threads is a good fit for your brand, for your audience, and the same thing with Blue Sky. Doesn't mean you need to be there, but yes, those
Mhm.
are networks that are taking off and are at least warrant a good look. So
Yeah,
this
that's
is a great segue into my next question because we're talking about using potentially different networks. We're talking about creating different messaging for different kinds of audiences. How do you maintain brand consistency while adapting your voice across all these different audiences? I mean, you already mentioned earlier how when you're posting to LinkedIn, right, you're tweaking the message versus posting to, say, Instagram. How are you maintaining that consistency across all of that?
yeah. I mean, it requires knowledge about the different platforms. Like you have to actually spend time there as a user. And I wasn't super active on LinkedIn until maybe like 2 years ago. But I think that that's really valuable because then you can actually see how, the people that you're communicating to are using the platform as well. So you need to just know the platform and like the lingo and the habits and like the grammar of like using that platform. Generally speaking, people aren't talking about ROI on Instagram, right?
Right.
So it's like, it's pretty clear that like even if we use the same piece of content, so like the same carousel or the same photo album or like something like that, you can talk about different things with it on LinkedIn or Instagram. And that's where like that platform knowledge comes in. I will also say like clear brand guidelines are super, super important. And I feel like we're at a great place with Felfel because we've got 10 now 11 years of a really solid brand to work with from to work from in Europe, but also have the opportunity to kind of refresh that for the US market. And trust me, there was definitely a lot of localization work on my end because even though, in Europe they're using English among other languages, European English and American English is like so, so different. But anyway, we've always been super clear about like tone and brand pillars, and I feel like that's what matters most. So you can kind of apply the same structure to completely different topics as needed. So yeah, when it comes to the B2B audience, I'm definitely thinking more about like relevant keywords and industry buzzwords a little bit more because that helps stop the scroll and lends us more authority where it really matters. But what I'm really saying is, as long as you know your brand and you know the platform, you can always like tweak how many emojis or different types of vocabulary you want to use on each platform. So the key is just ensuring, that the values and personality of the brand still remain intact on every touch point.
As Agorapulse is a Parisian company, I completely relate to it. The challenges of trying to translate both literally and figuratively messaging and copy into different regions. But I like how you basically spoke to your earlier point about how important it is to be spending time on each individual platform because that's the only way that you're going to understand and know and become accustomed to the nuances and the differences between them. As much as I love using a social scheduler, if that's all you ever use to post content to LinkedIn and Instagram, your posts are going to look the same because you wouldn't know how to differentiate them by platform. So, Michelle, I've got just one more question for you. I'd love if you could share advice to other marketers. What would your advice be if they're just starting to kind of navigate this challenge of having a dual audience content or approach to their social media marketing?
Yeah, I hmm, there's a lot to say. I would say start
Take your time.
with yeah, start with an actual understanding, a deep understanding of each audience. And I had to put on some different hats and like think through some different personas when I was starting out and like still trying to craft the perfect like B2B tone for Fel New York. Um, so think about, what does the audience value? What are their actual pain points? Why are they even on this platform in the first place? Like,
Mm.
are you looking for business solutions on Instagram, or are you just like passing the time before your next meeting or something, right? So think about like how they're actually consuming that content. You can kind of map those journeys, and you can also find overlap, and that makes things easier, right? When you're able to reuse the same content. But I would say if there's one thing to take away, like I said earlier, just remember you don't have to be everything to everyone. Not every post has to demonstrate every single USP or value or connect with, all of your audiences. I think it's better to connect meaningfully with your audience in smaller, more focused ways than to risk diluting your message or just confusing your audience.
Love it. That is fantastic advice. Michelle, you've been an absolute delight. For those who might want to connect with you or learn more from you, where should they go?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Look up Michelle Fan, and I'd be happy to connect.
Terrific. Thank you, Michelle. We'll have her links and everything else in the show notes below. That's all the time we've got for today, friends. But don't forget to find the Social Pulse Podcast Hospitality Edition on Apple. Drop us a review. We'd love to know what you think. Until next time, see ya. Thanks for tuning in to the Social Pulse Podcast Hospitality Edition, hosted by Mike Alton and powered by AgoraPulse, the #1 rated social media management solution. Discover more at agorapulse.com. Enjoyed the episode? Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Your feedback drives our content.